Early game Terraria might be the most criticized stage of the game by the player base. A lot of people say that it's stale, boring, and doesn't offer as much as the other points of progression. But ultimately, I think that Terraria's early game has some pitfalls, but also has some benefits. So, is Terraria's early game actually boring? Let's talk about it. Like I said, there are definitely some downsides to the beginning of every Terraria playthrough. Your movement is extremely limited. Since you have no good accessories from the start for a while, you are relegated to walking at a very slow pace across the entire map. Everything in general is slower, not just the movement. Trees take forever to chop down, your pickaxe is extremely slow, and getting around the world in general can be a big hassle. While the early game is the stage when you need to collect the most stuff to make progress, it's also the stage where collecting loot is the most inconvenient because of this slowness. There's a reason that mods like the Calamity mod make players' movement and pickaxe speed faster by default. Areas like the underground jungle and desert are death traps in the early game, which can make exploration a little bit less exciting. You obviously could explore the jungle whenever you want, but you'll likely die to a trap or enemy before reaching any good loot. The bosses for early game Terraria aren't anything special either. I would consider King Slime and the Eye of Cthulhu to be the only true early game bosses. King Slime is one of the most useless and boring bosses in the entire game, and while the Eye of Cthulhu has amazing drops, it isn't the most fun in terms of gameplay either. Bad world generation can also make the early game a total nightmare in some cases. For example, if your world doesn't have an accessible cave with good loot, you'll be forced to dig down forever until you actually find something useful, which is super boring, especially because of the slow early game pickaxes. On any difficulty setting higher than classic, the early game is possibly the most dangerous and difficult stage in the game, which can be very off-putting for newcomers. A few hits for monsters could be enough to kill you. I hate it when you're in the early game, you don't have quite good enough weapons to fight monsters or outdoor enemies, it's nighttime and you just have to lock yourself in a little box and wait it out. It is so boring. These are my biggest frustrations with early game Terraria, but for as many bad things as there are, I actually think there are a lot of good things to make up for it. The early game is the most exploration focused stage of the game by far. You basically have no choice but to explore the world to get good loot. Whether it be searching for living wood trees to find the wand of sparking or going through caves in search of a mushroom biome for more accessories, you are always going to be going somewhere new. There is a little bit of exploration later on as well, like in early hard mode, but you'll likely be doing most of the exploring in the early game. When I think of Terraria, I think of exploration more than anything else. It's my favorite aspect about the entire game by far. The biggest reason I like the early game more than hard mode, for example, is because there is little to no exploration in hard mode in comparison. The lack of player strength also makes every new item way more rewarding to collect. Nothing compares to the satisfaction when you find your first set of Hermes boots, or you discover a pyramid and then get a sandstorm in a bottle. Getting new items in later stages of the game is still rewarding, but it isn't as impactful. This satisfaction is part of the reason that exploration is so fun in the early game in the first place. You have so much to gain every time you go out looking for gear. Just 1 or 2 golden chests can be a game-changing thing. I would also argue that you have the most player freedom in the beginning of a playthrough. For example, you don't have to restrict yourself to use a certain class to get the best results like you do in the late game. You can truly do whatever you want, and nearly everything is useful in one way or another. Despite how challenging the early game can be, it's also really relaxing. You only have to take care of a few NPCs, and you don't have to prepare for insanely challenging bosses. The focus on building and exploration instead of boss fights in general is what makes it appeal to me. I think it's fair to say that Terraria becomes more boss focused as the game continues, to the point where many people would call the end of the game a boss rush. I love Terraria's bosses just like everybody else, but they've never really been my favorite thing about the game, so I enjoy that the early game has different priorities. At the end of the day, whether you like or dislike the early game comes down to what you prefer in general. If you really enjoy making progress and fighting bosses, you'll probably find it to be super boring. If you love exploration, building, and relaxing in general, you'll probably enjoy the early game just like I do. Would you make any changes to Terraria's early game? Let me know in the comments, and as always, remember to subscribe for more Terraria discussions, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.